Welcome to the Alaska Weather Show. I'm meteorologist Peter Chan, coming to you from the National Weather Service on this Friday, November 25th, 2022. And if you'd like additional weather information on top of what I provide in this broadcast, you can go to weather.gov. That is the online presence of the National Weather Service. It'll bring you to a map of the continental U.S. with Alaska and Hawaii to the lower left. Just point and click anywhere on that map, and it'll bring up forecast and any relative watches, warnings, or advisories that are in effect. And looking at the map this Friday afternoon, a couple items of interest. We have winter storm warnings and winter weather advisories for portions of West Texas and southeast New Mexico. Some of the snowfall in the lowlands, as much as 3 to 5 inches, with as much as 6 to 12 in the higher terrain, and a few of the smaller mountain ranges down there. Also, winter weather advisories across northern Maine and areas of western Montana and Idaho. Here in Alaska, we have winter weather advisories for the northern panhandle, including the Haines and Klondike highways for 3 to 5 inches of snow through 6 a.m. Saturday morning. Also, winter weather advisory for east central Alaska range for 4 to 8 inches of snow through Sunday afternoon. We're going to see a push of colder air work its way northwest to southeast across the mainland into the panhandle this weekend. So temperatures are definitely going to be cooling down, but it does look like above normal temperatures that will develop over the Bering early next week and then push into the west side of the state mid and late next week. So things will just kind of flip back around, but it'll be a gradual process. Looking at a couple of the FAA webcams this Friday afternoon, Isabel Pass, some light snow and fog, 16 degrees, where there is that winter weather advisory in effect through Sunday afternoon. And then Juneau, picking up rain and fog, 38 degrees. Temperatures have been running a little warmer there, so it's looking now like maybe the snow forecast for Juneau is going to have to be trimmed downward, even though right now, as of this mid-afternoon, they're under a winter weather advisory. And you can see the winter weather advisories in effect there for the northern panhandle. The area that will most likely see the most snow will be along stretches of the Haines and Klondike highways up toward going up toward White Pass, and then also up there across the east central Alaska range, including Isabel Pass and around Black Rapids, as much as 4 to 8 inches of snow through mid-Sunday afternoon. And looking at the satellite imagery, we can see enhancement to the clouds in the Gulf. There's a low pressure centered there over the north-central Gulf with a frontal band pushing in through the Gulf. And then further off to the west, fair amount of cloud cover along the west side of the state and a weak area of low pressure there around the Seward Peninsula. But another main system is southwest of the Aleutians, and that system will be bringing low pressure and a frontal system up in through the western and central Aleutians as we go through the weekend. But again, looking along areas of the Gulf Coast, the snows will continue at least through this Friday night along Prince William Sound and the surrounding intercoastal mountains, along with areas of the Copper River Basin, but that area of snow will tend to begin to diminish as we go through Saturday afternoon. And looking at the weather map today, there's the low centered on the northern Gulf, the frontal band extending eastward up into the Panhandle. We have another weak low out over the Seward Peninsula, colder air coming in on the backside of that, and then the frontal system and low that's well southwest of the Aleutians as we go into early Saturday morning. Late tonight, we expect the low over the Gulf to slowly begin to kind of stretch eastward and weaken. Also the low up there over the western side of the state, and then you can see the frontal system beginning to occlude more on Saturday afternoon as it pushes a pretty good push of some moderate to locally heavier rain into the central Aleutians along with some wind. And then the low across the northern Gulf slides eastward and begins to weaken, and this is going to allow more of a offshore flow to develop across south central areas, and eventually the Panhandle as a stronger area of high pressure develops over the North Slope and Brooks Range Sunday afternoon. This high is going to slide southeastward into the Yukon territory early next week and strengthen to around 1050 millibars. So that's going to allow colder air and gap winds to really set up there southern parts of the state and along areas of the Panhandle. Interior temperatures could be rather common in the teens and 20s below. A few of the normally colder spots in the Yukon Flats along the Elkhorn border could see some temperatures in the 30s below as we get into areas as we get into early next week. Sorry about that phone interruption. Taking a look now at what we have for temperatures. We have readings in the 30s along the Panhandle for overnight lows above freezing outer southwest southern coast, below freezing though as you get up through the northern Panhandle at Skagway and areas of the southern interior. 9 above at Glen Allen and the areas of the Copper River Basin, and then Saturday afternoon highs should generally be above freezing in the Panhandle with some lower 40s there, the southwest and south outer coast. And as we get up through areas of the Susitna Valley and Copper River Basin, highs only in the teens, near 20 for a high there in Anchorage. And for Sunday morning, lows could be down around and a bit below zero across areas of the Matsu Valley and including the Copper River Basin. And we're looking for temperatures in the 20s there along the northern and western portion of the Panhandle. Going into Sunday afternoon, high temperatures will be chilly, only lower teens, including Anchorage, 12 above. And we expect highs below freezing at Juneau as that colder air, those gap winds set up. We're going to see northeasterly flow coming off the mainland and Canada there. So that'll bring the colder temperatures. And then across the north, Saturday morning, we are looking at low temperatures, rather widespread, single digits above and below zero. Some areas around 10 below, including Fort Yukon. For Saturday afternoon, we expect temperatures to continue to cool, not be as seasonable as they were. And then Sunday morning, notice lows. We start to see more widespread teens and even near 20 below there, North Slope, Brooks Range. And the cold will expand going into Sunday. Daytime highs generally in the single digits above and below zero. And colder temperatures coming by the time we get into Sunday morning. So teens and 20s below with a few areas around 30 below. And Saturday morning we expect temperatures in the teens, and along the Alaska Peninsula it's looking to be temperatures only around freezing, extending out the tip of the Alaska Peninsula, maybe 36 or so there around Dutch Harbor. Saturday afternoon highs will be confined to the lower mid-40s out in the Aleutian chain, and below freezing across the southwest interior and even along the coast. We anticipate highs only in the lower mid-20s. Sunday morning lows even colder, getting down into the single digits near and maybe a tad even below zero as you creep up the Yukon River Valley. Temperatures still holding above freezing the tip of the Alaska Peninsula and going out into the Aleutians. And then Sunday afternoon highs only single digits up toward McGrath, and as you creep up the Yukon River, teens like Bethel and Aniak, and so it's going to get definitely chiller. But the interesting thing is by the time we get into early December, the 6 to 10 day outlook is calling for temperatures to average above to much above normal in the west, centered on Bethel on up into areas surrounding Norton Sound. So any ice that forms this past weekend, early in the weekend, it's going to have a tendency to get back into a melting regime there along the west side of the state. So we just kind of be flipping and flopping back and forth. Colder temperatures than normal expected across the Panhandle to start out early December. Precipitation, though, may average above normal, especially along and north of the Yukon River through the Brooks Range and North Slope, and below normal in the Panhandle.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Well, it's now time to check your aviation weather, and if you have a flight planned this weekend, Saturday or Sunday, we'll start out Saturday morning. Area of low pressure that's been out over the northern Gulf this Friday will gradually weaken as the frontal system has pushed in and weakened as well. Precipitation will tend to diminish across the Panhandle Saturday afternoon and early evening. We'll still see IFR conditions along the interior coastal mountains, southern areas of the Panhandle, including Ketchikan and Craig. Also, we'll have areas of IFR on the north side of the Alaska Range and along much of the Alcan border, with pockets off the northwest coast, Seward Peninsula, east end of Norton Sound. By Saturday afternoon, IFR conditions will continue to diminish across areas of the Panhandle, but persist on the north side of the Alaska Range, as well as areas along the Alcan border on up toward the eastern portion of the Brooks Range and North Slope. A broad area of IFR conditions are expected with an approaching frontal band out across areas of the western and central Aleutians. For Sunday morning, we'll see improved conditions there across the Panhandle. IFR remaining, though, along areas of the Alaska Range on up toward the upper Yukon Valley along the Alcan border, and then a broad area of IFR conditions with the frontal system and low pressure that will be impacting the western into the central Aleutians. and Sunday afternoon, we see much of the mainland actually improve because we're going to have a stronger Arctic high begin to build up over the North Slope and Brooks Range before it slides southeastward into the central Yukon territory. And by Monday, it'll approach near 1050 millibars. But a wide area of IFR conditions are anticipated out over the central Bering from St. Matthew down through St. Paul and St. George and across the central into the eastern Aleutians. Past conditions on Saturday, Anativik Pass will be generally MVFR, but if you fly north, the north entrance there, IFR up as you get into the North Slope. Same thing for Adigan Pass. North Slope areas IFR, but Adigan Pass generally MVFR. Further south and west, Lake Clark and Merrill will see MVFR conditions prevail Saturday, especially east entrance. As you fly west of the west entrances, expect IFR conditions. Same thing for Rainy Pass as we begin to round up toward the central Alaska range. Generally MVFR on the south side, but IFR on the north side. Windy Pass will see MVFR conditions, but IFR conditions are likely on the north side. And same thing for Isabel Pass, IFR on the north side of the Alaska Range, MVFR through the pass, especially south entrance. And Metasta Pass should generally hold on to IFR conditions. A little further south and west, Tanita should enjoy at least VFR conditions Saturday, as will Portage Pass. And then further east there, the north end of the Panhandle, Chilkoot and White, IFR conditions early Saturday, giving way to MVFR conditions as that system begins to pull away and weaken. Freezing levels across the state on Saturday morning. The surface freezing line runs through the central Bering along the southwest coast, Lake Iliamna, down along the east side of the Kenai, northern Gulf Coast into the interior, inner channels, interior mountains of the Panhandle, and then we see freezing levels generally around everywhere across the mainland below 2,000 feet. And 4 areas of the central Aleutians bumping upwards to 4,000 to 6,000 feet ahead of that frontal system. Icing, the greatest threat of icing will be across the far south end of the Panhandle, Haida Gwaii into coastal British Columbia. Areas of the interior, especially the southwest, lower Yukon Valley, Norton Sound, above 4,000 feet, the potential for some isolated moderate icing. Pretty strong level jet core located at 30,000 feet out of the northwest, extending from off the coast of Russia through St. Lawrence across the southwest interior, Kenai into the Gulf, and North Pacific interface with maximum jet core winds upwards of 135 to 145 knots. Bringing it down to 9,000 feet, 700 millibars, still a broad area of northwesterly winds from eastern Russia across St. Lawrence, across the southwest, Kodiak Island, and along the lower Gulf and North Pacific interface, as high as 60 to 65 knots. And then finally, 3,000-foot winds, broad area of winds of 45 to 50 knots there through the Gulf, and an area of 50 to 60 knot winds along and north of the central Aleutians into the lower Bering. The greatest threat for isolated severe turbulence in through portions of the central Aleutians, surface to 4,000 feet. Much of the north lower Chukchi Sea, Seward Peninsula, surface to 3,000 feet, and then surface to 4,000 feet in southern areas of the state.
Leatherbacks are the largest turtles on Earth, growing up to 7 feet long and weighing more than 2,000 pounds. These sea turtles are among the most highly migratory animals on Earth, some traveling up to 10,000 miles a year between their nesting and feeding grounds. Prevalent in every ocean except the Arctic and Antarctic, the species overall is declining, more so in the Pacific. In the eastern Pacific, the Mexican population was once thought to be the largest in the world and has experienced an alarming decline.
This trajectory of decline that we've seen and actually collapse, we're talking about only 20 or 30 turtles nesting every year, where thousands used to just 40 years ago. That's the kind of dramatic decline.
The western Pacific population has been declining steadily, and it's particularly critical to act now before it collapses, while there are enough turtles in nests to respond to conservation measures. But threats to all leatherbacks in the Pacific need to be addressed.
The top threats to populations are uncontrolled coastal development, all the bad stuff on the nesting beaches, egg harvest, poaching of the females, predation on the eggs by dogs and pigs. Deforestation makes the sand too warm and dry and the eggs don't hatch. Another one is incidental capture in fishing gear. During their vast migrations, they get caught in fishing gear throughout the Pacific. And finally, marine debris, which the leatherbacks mistake for their favorite food, jellyfish, and they choke on those.
Protecting leatherbacks in U.S. waters alone is not enough to ensure the continued existence of the species. The highly migratory nature of Pacific leatherbacks requires cooperation and international collaboration. NOAA is focusing on partnerships with Mexico, Central America, Indonesia, Papua New Guinea, and the Solomon Islands in the Pacific.
Our action plan promotes a holistic recovery strategy that addresses all the sources of mortality. So that's basically ensuring that the remaining nesting sites are protected and the nests produce as many hatchlings as possible. And then secondly, in tandem with that, is reducing the fisheries-related mortalities. We're working with international partners to incentivize community participation on the nesting beach conservation and developing alternative livelihood programs that wean communities off leatherback resources and introduce alternative methods for food and income. Recovery is going to take a long time, on the order of 20 to 30 years at least, before we see some of these actions bear fruit. But here in the U.S., we can all help leatherbacks by making seafood choices, for instance, that support sustainable fishing practices. And beachgoers can certainly do their part by keeping our oceans clean of plastic debris, picking up marine litter, particularly plastic bags.
Together with our partners, we are strengthening protection and conservation efforts to ensure a future for leatherbacks, helping them to survive and once again thrive in the waters of the Pacific Ocean.
For 40 years, NOAA scientists have been collecting data and piecing together the story of the gray whale. Each year, new discoveries are made, revealing the secrets of this ancient traveler. With the northeastern Pacific population recovered, leading scientists from the NOAA Southwest Fisheries Science Center continue their research efforts to help save the western population from extinction. The most effective way to identify individuals and count the population is to photograph them from the surface. Using the gray whale's distinctive markings and gray spots caused by parasites on their skin, scientists document these characteristics to identify individuals.
So we're able to track migratory pathways and corridors by the simple use of photo identification. There are other ways to do that as well, biopsy sampling and genetics.
And from the air.
Aerial photography is one way you can study animals based on their size and shape. So you can learn a lot about nutritive and reproductive condition of whales just by measuring their size and shape from vertical aerial photographs.
You can also put satellite transmitters on them and track them remotely. You put the transmitter on and let them go, and you watch them move across the Pacific or down to China or wherever it might be.
To further learn and discover where these great sojourners swim, the team of researchers traveled to Russia and set up camp on Sakhalin Island.
The main focus of our research while we were on Sakhalin was to collect photo identification. If it was a whale that we had not collected a genetic sample from previously, we would also attempt to collect a sample from the whales.
Whereas whales are endowed with natural insulation, their human observers must gear up to brave the cold in order to study these marine giants up close.
We're typically only able to work about 1/3 of the time that we're there, and that's mostly due to this fog that just invades the area and sits sometimes for weeks on end. So it can be very challenging to try and do field work in this site.
Recently, 2 whales from the western population surprised scientists by migrating across the Pacific to the waters of California and Mexico.
It's a really fun finding. It's added another piece to the puzzle that we didn't previously know about. And I would have to say that it's opened up more questions than we had before.
Research scientists from Japan, Russia, and the United States share images of animals they've spotted.
We take a photograph of an individual off of Sakhalin Island, and we get a phone call from Japanese scientists, and they say, hey, guess what? We've got a picture of a gray whale in Japan. We say, can you send it to us? We'd love to try and match it. They'll send us the picture, we'll compare it to our catalog, and we'll say, hey, we've got a match from Sakhalin to Japan.
Unlike many species of whales that still remain on the endangered species list, the eastern Pacific gray whale, once on the brink of extinction, now numbers about 20,000 individuals. Recovery efforts that started 40 years ago and the ongoing research and monitoring by NOAA scientists have contributed to the conservation of the gray whales. Together, with legal protection and public education, scientists are playing their part to ensure the survival of this magnificent migratory animal.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Looking at the sea ice edge today as we begin our marine weather segment, the ice has grown rather substantially here over the past week across the far north along the Arctic coast, the Chukchi Sea coast, and even in through Norton Sound. And that'll be the case through the weekend, even extending down along the YK deltas. The cold air is going to spread northwest to southeast across the mainland into the panhandles and Arctic high builds later this weekend from the North Slope and Brooks Range into the Yukon territory by early next week. But there is going to be a system work its way out of the North Pacific into the Bering, and this frontal system in low pressure will pull warmer air back up along the west coast, especially by the middle and latter part of next week. So we'll return back to a regime that could allow for some ice to melt and break up with a stronger southerly flow, so keep that in mind. But otherwise, in the meantime, through the panhandle, winds will be out of the southeast to south, 15 to 25 knots, waves anywhere from 3 to 5 feet north of Petersburg up through Lynn Canal, 7 feet down there, Dixon entrance, and then offshore for the Gulf, for the open waters, winds westerly to 30 knots, waves 18 to 20 feet south of Gustavus, and then look for more east to northeast winds, Yakutat westward with waves of 12 to 14 feet. On Sunday, winds will turn northerly to start to develop offshore flow there, first in the inner channels, upwards to 30 knots in Lynn Canal with waves building to 6 feet, and along the outer coast of the Panhandle, northwest winds 20 to 25 knots, Gustavus down through Craig with waves of 13 to 16 feet. For areas of the northwestern Gulf, outflow winds out of the northwest, upwards of 40 to 45 knot gales at the entrance there of Cook Inlet with waves of 11 to 16 feet. Northwest winds across Prince William Sound at 30 knots, waves 6 feet. And on Sunday, winds not quite as strong, they'll come down a bit, but still offshore flow mainly out of the north. North winds in Prince William Sound 20 knots, waves 4 feet. Northwest winds off the Kenai and entrance there of Cook Inlet anywhere from 25 upwards to 35 knots and waves 8 to 12 feet. For Kodiak Island on Saturday, winds will be out of the west 25 knots, Shelikof Strait, but east of there in the open waters of the Gulf, 35 knots, northwesterly winds, 13-foot waves, and as we drop down along the length of the Alaska Peninsula, winds will generally be out of the north-northwest around 15 knots, waves 12 feet south of Sand Point and 8 feet north of Cold Bay. For Sunday, winds still northwesterly across Kodiak Island, 20 to 30 knots, but winds will start to turn back more toward the northeast and east across the Alaska Peninsula and pick up to 30 knots there, especially Sandpoint out through Cold Bay, False Pass, waves running 8 to 10 feet on the North Pacific side and 6 to as high as 9 feet there on the Bering side. Across the Bering Sea, looking at the Aleutians, eastern Aleutians, east winds 30 knots, waves running 8 to 12 feet either side of on Alaska. But as we extend out Nikolsky westward all the way to Kiska and Shimia, look for easterly gales upwards of 40 knots, waves generally 15 to 20 feet on the North Pacific, as well as the Bering side away from the shelter of the islands. And then on Sunday, winds will be 35 to 40 knot south to southeast gales, eastern Aleutians including Dutch Harbor, and then southerly winds through the central Aleutians of 20 to 25 knots, waves running 12, 14 feet on the North Pacific side, 9 to 12 feet on the Bering side. Along the southwestern coast, including the YK deltas and south of St. Lawrence or surrounding Nunavik Island, northwest to north winds 20 to 25 knots, waves generally running around 8 feet or so, 25 knot westerly winds through the ice-covered areas there of Norton Sound. And then on Sunday, winds turn northerly in Norton Sound, 15 knots with the ice still in place, but further south of there, all along the coast and extending, once you get out toward St. Matthew and St. Paul, winds will pick up to easterly 45 knot gales with waves building from 12 feet near Nunavik Island to 24 feet there near St. Matthew. And then along the Arctic coast, northeast winds 15 knots with ice in place, accelerating northwest to north 25 to 30 knots through the Bering Strait with waves of 6 to 9 feet in the lower Chukchi Sea. And then on Sunday, west-northwest winds along the Arctic coast 10 to 20 knots with ice in place, and winds will generally be a mixed bag through the lower Chukchi Sea at 15 to 20 knots, turning easterly on the north side of St. Lawrence Island. Waves lower Chukchi Sea 3 to 4 feet and as much as 8 to 10 feet on the north side of St. Lawrence.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.